at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Well, we're hearing this conflicting news, conflicting reports coming out of the city of Bakhmut regarding which side controls that city. What's your sense? Do we know who actually controls it?
It's difficult to tell. It's almost like a PR war as well on who controls it. But you know what? At the end of the day, this is a city completely destroyed by the Russians. Many are making the comparison of Bakhmut to Aleppo. Scorched earth Russian tactics have leveled what used to be arguably one of the most beautiful cities in that part of Ukraine. So it's like in the past more than a year, the Russians have been bombing museums, libraries, churches. They've now bombed the heck out of Bakhmut. Does that represent a battlefield victory? All of that, I don't think so.
Why was Russia willing to lose so much in terms of supplies, in terms of human lives in this battle? Is it that strategic, or is this about messaging?
Well, there are a couple of reasons there. One is Russia from the start has been deploying basically a meat grinder approach to this war, sending wave upon wave of human beings to fight, many of them unprepared, many of them unequipped. And then secondly, Mr. Putin and his circle of elites needed some kind of win to show to the Russian public. They've been in the past weeks harshly criticized by military bloggers, so they really needed something to show. On the other hand, the Ukrainians, when they see things are not going their way, they do have compassion. They pull their forces away, unlike the Russian meat grinder approach to fighting.
Is there a strategic value still to this city? I mean, they've been fighting for so long, but we're also anticipating that Ukraine might launch a counteroffensive and that may be nowhere near Bakhmut.
Yeah, I don't think it's that important. I mean, it isn't, for example, a port city where the Russians could leave the city as it is and perhaps use the port and do things like illegally ship out grain. But I think the Ukrainians are getting ready for a counteroffensive. It could actually be into summer. And I think it isn't something that's going to be shock and awe. You know, listening to Mr. Reznikov, the defense minister, speak, I think it's going to be in bits and pieces. But having said all that, there is some sort of political pressure on the Zelensky administration to prove that all of this expensive military kit, these billions of dollars in aid, is going to good use. I have no doubt whatsoever in terms of the resolve of the Ukrainian government to finish this off, to push the Russians back to pre-Crimea, pre-2014 Donetsk lines.
Speaking of those new weapons commitments, we heard yet more commitments coming out of the G7 summit this weekend. Does Ukraine now have what it needs to begin this counteroffensive?
It has the promises, the pledges, but it doesn't have all of the equipment it needs. There are two critical things there. One is a more robust air defense system. Just in the past hours, missiles and drones have been targeting Odessa, Kharkiv, and Kherson. So the Ukrainians have been expending a lot of weaponry to shoot those things down, and there's a limit to how much can go in the air on that effort. And then the other thing here is that with the F-16s, of course, Ukraine will have a more robust capability to shoot down Russian aircraft, perhaps even to strike legitimate military targets within Russia, although that's something that causes a bit of nervousness in Washington. But it's basically those two things. But again, I have to really point out that it will take time for these F-16s to be delivered. We don't even know which countries are going to give them. And then the training, different countries had different platforms on the F-16s, different software. So the best scenario would be if, for example, the Netherlands delivered 12 in one batch, and then it would only require one set of training.
President Zelensky was there at the G7. He was meeting with G7 leaders. He also met with the leaders of countries like India and Brazil that have remained more neutral. If this conflict drags on, will those countries eventually have to pick a side?
Well, I think they should have picked the right side by now and dropped their neutrality. It was an interesting guest list at the G7, India, Vietnam, Indonesia. Also, we would have expected South Africa there. These are countries that have been sitting on the fence, but I think it's very, very important that they make the right choice. Look, at the end of the day, what Russia is also doing is weaponizing food in this war. None of these countries are immune from that. In fact, when I just left Odessa the other day, I saw no ships whatsoever in the port, none on the horizon. Russia is restricting the flow of Ukrainian grain, and that's going to reverberate across the world, including in these countries that are sitting on the fence. So they should drop their neutrality, go help Ukraine to win this war, and then there won't be this food crisis that was being manufactured by Russia.
I want to ask you, because you mentioned you've been back and forth to Odessa, and this beefed up air defense system that's in place not only there but in Kyiv. How much of a game changer has that been for daily life in cities across Ukraine?
Well, it's been huge. A few days ago, I was there in the middle of the night in Odessa when rockets were raining down, and the air defense system were very robust and shot all of the missiles down. But I think what is happening, too, from the Russian side is they're playing psychological warfare. These strikes typically happen in the middle of the night. People are at their most vulnerable. A lot of us are not getting proper sleep, especially those who are in Kyiv. The anxiety is very high. It boggles the mind, the capability of Russia to still have that many missiles, that many drones. And one other thing, if I may, on that point, I just spoke to Ukraine's ambassador to the UN and asked him about Israel, for example, playing a more robust role, targeting targets in Iran where these drones are being manufactured. I think Israel can do more, should do more in that regard.
Interesting. Michael Bociurkiw, a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, thank you so much for your insights.
My pleasure.
Around the world.